How's your nephew treating you here?
Expansively.
He should have told you how much he's going to work you.
No, he did not.
I'm sure you thought you were coming up just to take a relaxing tour.
Well, that's right. That's all he said was, how about you're coming up? And I said, okay, thinking it'll only be a person-to-person experience. But as it turned out, you see what he's done. He's ballooned this thing way beyond reason.
Well, you deserve all of that.
Oh, Lord.
You know, one of the things that we didn't have a chance to get to the other night was something that you indicated in your book was really a highlight of your career, and it dealt with the whole Reidsville prison reform. How did that first come to your attention?
Well, a class action was filed in my court, and I was dealing with it. And I, of course, granted class action status. And as a result of that, we had a number of hearings on the correction of complaints by the inmates, many of which were meritorious. And we did. We created, well, I appointed a monitor who was a member of the University of Toledo. He was a professor, but he was excellent. And he, together with a lawyer with the Georgia Legal Aid Society, really pushed this case. And they came up with solutions which were just incredible, considering what it was before that time.
And that really became a model for the penal system down there.
It did, not only down there, but nationwide. Yeah. Yes.
And I think that's a real credit.
Well, considering Georgia's reputation as the chain gang state, yes.
When you found yourself graduating from Emory Law School and deciding to start your practice in Georgia, not many Italians in Georgia.
No, there weren't.
Not many Yankees in Georgia.
No.
How did they treat you?
Well, you were a damn Yankee. And that created the entire portrait.
Was it hard to get a job?
Very much, very difficult. In fact, the only job I could get was the one with Reuben Garland, who was not a popular lawyer, but nevertheless, he was the only one that would give me a job at $150 a month, which was less than the elevator operator made.
Did your wife have to work during that time period?
No, she did not.
Yeah.
She never worked during our marriage.
When you got that first job, with an idea that this was the starting point anyways, did you anticipate you would be with Rube long, or was that just a stepping stone?
Well, I had no concept at that time of what I would be doing other than working for him.
Did you become a Republican at that time?
Yes, I did.
How did that happen?
Well, the fact of the matter is that the Republicans were much more progressive in their dealing with the racial problems than the Democrats were. I had an awful time trying to get the city of Brunswick to let the blacks use the city hall, not only the city hall, but the facilities with a swimming pool. You know, we had an awful time trying to get them to do it, and we finally succeeded.
What was the nature like? We're talking 1950s here,
Yes.
Georgia. I have this vision of the Richard Russells of the world.
Yes.
not necessarily tolerant people.
Well, they were not. You'd have to go into the history of the treatment of the South by the North as a result of the Civil War. And that was it. And then Richard Russell had to capitalize on that in order to retain the political standing that he had.
And it was significant.
Oh, very much so. He's the one that made Lyndon Johnson, if you recall.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Did you have a chance to meet him?
Yes, sure did. At that time, I was a county commissioner, and he had written, as he had probably with all the county commissioners in Georgia, what was the threat of Carl Sanders against him. And I wrote him back and said he needn't worry about it. He could conduct his campaign from the floor of the Senate. Mm-hmm. And he remembered that. And so we had a very friendly relationship thereafter.
Was he part of your world when you were attempting to become a federal district court judge?
Well, yes, he was. But of course, being a Democrat,
right.
he didn't participate in the selection process.
Yet, at the same time, you had a little bit of help from Jimmy Carter.
Oh, yes, and I had helped him in his original campaign for governor of Georgia. And I gave him a sizable contribution, and that impressed him, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he didn't forget it. And so when I encountered difficulty in getting the appointment, he actually called me and said, "What can I do to help you?" Oh. And I did tell him that I didn't know for the moment, but I'd call him back, and I did. And it was that I wanted him to get in touch with the former president of the ABA, Smythe Gambrell, to put some pressure on the ABA, the American Bar Association of the time, and he did. And that moved the selection process along, so I've often said that he was as responsible for my nomination as anybody.
Where was Griffin Bell in all of this?
Well, he had been Attorney General for, and I knew Griffin actually since 1954. Mm-hmm. I had known him, and that's where he was.
Herman Talmadge, was he part of this process at the time?
Well, he was insofar as he didn't object to my selection. You know, the senators had to sign a slip. They called it a blue slip, mm-hmm. as to any nomination. And he, of course, signed it in my favor.
Was that slip really designed to be sort of a veto more than...
Yes. Yeah, if the home state senator opposed the nomination, it would be pretty tough to get it.
You really wanted that job, didn't you?
Oh, very much. It had been a dream of mine, and I never thought that circumstances would be such as to permit me to attain it.
Yeah.
You know, you had to be extremely lucky as to that.
Well, you succeeded and was appointed by President Nixon.
I was.
And did you have a chance to meet him?
Oh, yes.
And what was your impressions of the president?
Well, at that time he was president, you know. I actually met him at the National Convention in 1960 mm-hmm. in Chicago. And basically that was it. And, you know, they were responsive to the state party structure and making their appointments.
You also supported heavily Barry Goldwater.
I did.
Again, did you have a chance to meet him?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he came down to St. Simon's.
Well, talk to me about Barry Goldwater.
Well, you know, in his heart, he was right. And he was in many respects, and in the future bore it out.
Well, you've had a chance to meet some people who were very historic and
Influential, yes, yes, I was.
Georgia. When I think of Georgia, and I think of the 50s, 60s, I think of the after effects of Brown versus Board of Education, separate but equal, and with all deliberate speed. What was the tenor of the Georgia school system at the time? That
Well, they had separate schools
right.
For black and non-whites, yes. And that was part of their fabric. And, of course, that was abolished by the Brown decision.
Did you get caught up in that at all, either from an attorney?
Very much so. Well, as a judge.
Right, as a judge, okay.
Yeah.
In what respects?
Well, there were a number of complaints filed for the refusal of the local school boards to adopt what the Brown decision held. And they resisted as long as possible.
What did that do for you personally as you were getting those kind of complaints brought before the bench? How did the population react to some of your...
Well, they were opposed to it, and as you can imagine, they were opposed to it. They were, I can recall really when we forced them to comply, how a Georgia farmer in Burke County shepherded his little 5-year-old girl in kindergarten and had to let her mix with the blacks, which was an aberration, of course.
Yeah. I remember spending some time in Georgia Tech and went down in the underground in Atlanta and met Lester Maddox. Did your paths cross with his?
Oh, yes. Yes, I knew him. In fact, we represented him when he was running the restaurant on one occasion.
What was he like? He just kind of got a...
Well, he was, as he sounded, an exuberant person.
Yeah.
And he paraded his axe handle routine
Right.
every place, even up in Congress, you know. But he was a states writer, you know, as just a thorough Southerner.
Given your background being not a thorough Southerner, but a Yankee, come down and sort of dealing with a guy like Lester Maddox, was that difficult professionally to...
No. No, it was not.
Yeah. As you were... You had so many opportunities during your time on the bench, and so many interesting cases. What are a couple of them that sort of stand out, the highlights, or that you thought you made a difference?
Well, one was the prison decisions. There were, I would say, over 50 different orders during the course of my supervision of the prison system. And that made a difference, a decided difference. Probably it was the most important case that I handled. By reason of its duration, for one thing. And, you know, judges were not schooled in running prisons and doing many things, but we still had to meet the problem and solve them. And you did your best to become acquainted with whatever it was.
You were, I'm going to flash back a little bit to your relationship with Rube Garland, because you started practice with Rube Garland.
Yes.
Then at one point you said, heck with it, I'm going back to Ada, Ohio.
Well, my father-in-law had wanted me to come up and join him in farming in Ohio, and I was just making, at that time, $200 a month. And I decided that there was nothing to this law business. And agreed with him that I'd come up, and we did for 2 years.
Was that transition difficult in the sense of?
Somewhat, but I retained some connection with Rube. In fact, in one immigration case, went to Washington to argue it for him, and didn't win, but nevertheless I still retained my connection with the law practice.
Then you leave Ada and you come back to Rube.
Yes, well, yes. As I said before, I was out picking corn in the in a snowstorm, and the machine broke down. I was down there trying to fix a belt, metal belt, and boy, I was cold. And I decided I'm going back to Atlanta, and did.
Did your wife have a difficult time? Or
no, she loved the South.
Yeah, yeah.
She really did.
And then after a few years with Rube Garland, you, well, how does the Roscoe Pickett part of this world fit in?
Well, he was a phony, as you might suspect. But he had an office right next to ours in the Candler building, and he was a real blowhard, and no one can beat a Southern blowhard, and he was in that category. But we became friendly, you know, and he'd always rely on me to give him some legal advice on what the law was. And he was a Republican. There was several counties in North Georgia that were Republicans throughout,
Right.
and he was part of that group. And he eventually became a national committeeman, and I helped him attain that position.
Right.
But that's how we became mixed up.
How long were you with Roscoe?
Well, I wasn't with him not quite a year.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and we had been associated in some cases in the Brunswick area before that time, and Way Highsmith, who was a Rhodes Scholar, by the way, and was a double first at Oxford, he invited me to come on down. And my wife had been on down there during our association in these lawsuits, and she decided that'd be a much better place than Atlanta, and she was right, of course.
Right.
But the transition was tremendous between the legal world in Atlanta and that in Brunswick, Georgia, country town.
Right.
But anyhow, I became acclimated, and I actually made friends easier there than in Atlanta. And the people in that area really took to me much more than my deserts. And here I am.
I'm always intrigued there. At what point does an individual decide he wants to not only get active in politics, but also start running for political office and doing that? Was there a point, an aha moment that said, I want to run, I want to run for an elective office?
Yeah, there was a point when that happened. I ran for the county commission, which was a dumb move for a lawyer because, as I mentioned to Justice Gerasi earlier today, you know, every time you decided against somebody, you'd end up in trying a lawsuit and finding his brother-in-law on that jury, and you don't know that.
Right.
And you lose the case, and your poor client suffers as a result of it, and one term was enough.
Right. But you stayed active in it, and
I did.
yeah.
Well, with the idea of hopefully getting an appointment.
Your paths crossed with Congressman Charlie Goodell at one point.
They did. We served on the same committee during the 1968 convention in Miami. And Charlie was chair of that particular committee. And of course, coming from Jamestown, we were both kind of cozied up.
Did your paths cross with one of his assistants at that time named Hillary Rodham?
No, not that I was aware of.
Yeah. Interestingly enough,
She was
an
an
assistant to
him. Well, after my time, I think.
This would have been when he was still a congressman. And what convention was it that Rockefeller was very much a part of?
Well, he was part of the 1960 convention because he came close to being nominated.
Right. This was either 64 or 68. I'm not sure which, but Hillary.
I think 68 was when he was a significant figure in the convention itself.
Well, she went to the convention with Goodell. So you probably were hanging with Hillary Clinton at the time, and you didn't even know it.
No, I didn't.
I interviewed her here, Senator Clinton, about Goodell. It was a hoot.
Well, I'm sure it wasn't. She liked this area.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And during that time period where there was a lot of activity, where the Republican Party in the 60s, 64 time period, where, that's not the police, by the way, that's a program upstairs. And the Republicans were trying to find its soul and trying to find a leader. And you had the Romneys and the Rockefellers. And did you have a favorite?
Well, I preferred Rockefeller, actually, to Nixon.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, Romney was not on the scene at that time.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I got to ask about Everett Dirksen.
Well, he was a highly interesting person, and that's an understatement.
Yep.
But he could make a speech like nobody. And I remember because he made his speech in what she called down. Tom Dewey was walking out of the chamber, and he said, "And there he goes, and he led us to defeat 4 years ago."
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. Newt Gingrich, was he on the scene?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I've known him well.
Yeah. Is he ready for a comeback?
Oh, I don't know. He, it seems to me, missed a chance in his contest with the president when he should have instructed all the congressmen who were Republicans to start to say Clinton is going to shut the government down, and captured that argument that Clinton later made. Mm-hmm. See, and the truth of the matter was that Newt Gingrich had offered him a bill, a monetary bill, and he turned it down. And he's the one that caused the turn down, but he was able to saddle Newt Gingrich for that, and the Republicans. And I thought that was a terrible blunder.
And kind of the beginning.
Well, yes.
Downfall, I mean.
Oh, yes.
One of the cases I read, which I found of interest, and it may not rise to one of the top cases around, but it's certainly curious, is you were involved when the ladies' master golf tournament, when they used the term masters, and you got Arnold Palmer involved and Cliff Roberts and the Augusta National Golf Course.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that story.
Well, Northwestern Mutual Insurance Company that owned a good parcel of land near Hilton Head decided they were going to put on a women's championship tournament, and they wanted to call it the Ladies Masters of some creek, and that's when the Augusta National people wanted to enjoin them from doing that. And that's the case that I heard. And what was kind of interesting about that case was that Arnold Palmer was one of their witnesses, and he was so nervous on the stand, he could hardly bring the cup of water to his lips. But it just shows you that when you're not in your medium, that you are as much a failure as anybody else.
Right. And Cliff Roberts was part of that?
Oh, well, yes, he was, he was a chairman of the Augusta National. And he, after the case was concluded and they didn't appeal my decision to enjoin the use of the name, that the person didn't realize that of what the decision was going to mean. But it nevertheless stuck.
Yeah. You've had some celebrities come through your courtroom.
Oh, sure.
Does that make a difference? And I realize it's a trial, but when you have a little bit of a notable...
Well, it does, but not with a judge. It doesn't, you know.
Yeah. Other than the press?
Oh, the press, well, you know what the press is like. And you also know about how you're considered by the legal profession. And I never had any problem with them. That's because I never answered them. And never became involved in any discussion with them. In fact, you know, they'd call many times to find out what my decision was in a case that I was considering at that time. And I had instructed our folks never tell them, just invite them to come up and look at it themselves.
Right, right.
And that's what we did. And never had any problem. At least they couldn't quote any of us as saying something that they were mistaken in saying.
You have a courthouse named after you.
Yes.
Just like, you know, we have an executive building named after Justice George.
Oh, I know it, and that's what's remarkable in this county. A Democrat of Italian origin actually having the county building named after him.
Well,
and you know, in our day, the Italians were at the bottom of the social world, and were looked upon that way. And so that's the sort of background that he overcame, to have his name on that county building.
Well, you're a Yankee, an Italian, and you have a courthouse named after you in Georgia.
Well, no, it's still not as great as really what he accomplished.
You guys are same out of the same stock. You deflect wonderfully, but it's just remarkable. That had to be quite an honor.
Well, it was.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Then you find yourself carrying a torch, part of the Atlanta Olympics.
Well, yes, I did. I didn't run very hard, I can assure you of that.
Well, I just think that's just remarkable. Did you paths cross? Now I'm just dropping names. Nicklaus Katzenback is mentioned in the book.
Sure.
Well, while you were in the prisoner camp.
Yes. Well, he at that time was also in law school. And we tried to have a law class, as it turned out, in torts, believe it or not. But I don't have the slightest recollection of what we discussed, believe it or not. But nevertheless, he was a very bright person.
And as you mentioned in the book, and I read elsewhere, because he's got a new book out on his life, that he was one of those penguins.
He was, yes.
And for the movie, that was the scene where the guy had the sandbags in the...
With the drawstrings on the bag itself. yes.
By the way, I don't think we asked, but what did you think of the movie itself? The
Well,
Great Escape?
except for the motorcycle scene,
Yeah.
it was all pretty good.
Yeah. Though it's funny, the motorcycle scene is what everybody
Well,
remembers.
sure, of course. That's that's why he wanted it to demonstrate his skill in riding a motorcycle.
Again, things that we probably didn't talk much about, but did it strike you as sort of ironic that when you were moving your way through after you escaped from Mooseburg and you're wearing dog tags of a Jewish soldier, and you're an Italian American working your way through, Italy, speaking Italian. Did anybody ever look at that and say, "What?"
No,
No.
no.
It's amazing.
And I didn't show it.
No, that's right. They never looked. You've been asked a ton of questions by a variety of people. What's the question you haven't been asked that you were waiting for?
Well, I don't know what it was. You fellows have really covered a wide range of issues and subjects.
Yeah.
I don't know of anything that you've missed.
Your dad passed away while you were in Georgia in 1950. Let's see, 52?
No, later than that.
Oh, excuse me, 57. 57.
Yes.
And your mother had died previously in 1951. As you sit here in Jamestown, New York, 2009, and you reflect back on being back home, and what's kind of that heritage that your mom and dad sort of willed to you?
Well, first of all, was really a thirst for education or knowledge that my mother imbued us with. That's the main thing.
Your dad seemingly was a guy who just had a heck of a hard work ethic.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
See, he had gone on down to South America, and that's when he learned how to read and write, when he was an adult with his family. And he was just a very hard worker.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way you can make it. You have to outwork the opposition or your competition.
Yeah. Is there another part of this? I know. I think Vince was talking about maybe just having this book updated. What in the book was missing? Did you get a sense after you read it saying either Vince, I forgot to tell Vince, or Vince?
No, he was pretty thorough.
Yeah.
He really was. And I was surprised. He learned things about my family that I didn't know.
Yeah.
I can't tell you now what they were, but I was just amazed at the amount of research that he did.
I don't know that we asked, but who's your hero?
Now that you ask, I can't really tell you. I can't really tell you.
Or a role model, or somebody that said, gee, I've met these extremely interesting political figures.
Well, legally, Robert Jackson.
Right.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, he was a master of language as well as of law itself. And he could turn a phrase like no one. And his language was so expressive. And I liked him for that. I never forgave him for publicly condemning Justice Black. He shouldn't have done that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it was probably the thing that kept him from being appointed Chief Justice. Mm-hmm. But if if I had a mentor, it was he. Well, because he was from Jamestown, for one thing.
As you were going through law school, whether it was starting at Ohio Northern and Wayne State and then ultimately Emory, did you read his stuff?
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And did you have any reason, being when you got out of the service in 1945, September 45, did you follow the Nuremberg trial?
Oh, very much.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure. And I regretted that he did so poorly in his cross-examination of the big fat fellow.
Gary, yeah. Judge, what's the question of this judge?
Oh, I just wanted to ask him what was it that he learned at Jamestown High School that stood him in good stead as he approached the French compound as he was escaping from the German prison camp?
Well, I was the only boy in this class, a third year class of French. And of course, my knowledge of the French language, to where I was pretty conversant with it, helped me, because the French would help you, while Germans wouldn't help you when you're in an escape status. And that's the way it was.
It not only helped in his escape, but also helped him to do something, accomplish something he never accomplished before nor since. While staying at the French compound, he played bridge with the French, and he happened to win a Grand Slam, doubled and redoubled.
In no trump.
And no trump. And he could only have done that if he could had spoken French, and he did.
Good for you. Well, Judge Gerasi was telling me a story. You were telling Jim Roselli earlier today, your recollection of the Post-Journal building and baseball.
Yes.
What's that story?
Well, in those days, you had to have a radio to follow the World Series, or you came up there in front of the Journal building, where they had a big board, that followed the play-by-play of the World Series. I remember that.
What was your team?
My team, the Detroit Tigers were always my team.
You're not saying that because I'm wearing this, are you?
No.
So who was your hero with the Tigers? Do you remember?
Well, there was Hank Greenberg,
Right.
Mickey Cochran, Goose Goslin.
Right.
Those were the ones.
Charlie Gehringer.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
He was very good.
Why the Tigers?
I suppose it was because my sister lived there, and I would go up, and Detroit at that time was a very exciting city. And that was it.
Because if I had to bet the ranch, an Italian-American living in Jamestown, New York, and you asked who his hero was, you would say Joe DiMaggio.
Oh, of course.
But that's the beauty of you. You've been a contrarian. Not only...
Somewhat.
Yeah, Methodist, Republican, Detroit Tiger fan. I love your individualism. This is great. Well, questions, Rob? The one you've been waiting for?
I can think of it to ask him what kept you going when you were a POW, that you would be able to escape.
Well, it's my desire to escape, and that was the dominant thought that I had all the time in the back of your mind, no matter what, was how to get out of here.
Amazing positivism that
Yeah.
you would make it out.
Yes, sir.
He's always expressed a thought or philosophy that luck played a great deal in his lifetime. Luck,
Sure
for
he
example,
did.
when the plane crashed and he was the only survivor. Luck when he was part of the Great Escape, but before the escape was actually effectuated, they moved the Americans from the compound, so he was not one of the 75 that was captured,
No, was
and
not.
50 of whom were killed. And then Luck played a role when
Sure.
he tried to escape the second time, and the gun jammed, the gun of the guard, and Luck played the part when I mentioned earlier. He could speak French and got accepted in the French compound. Luck played a part when he did get to Italy and was with a Italian family awaiting, trying to get to Switzerland, and he wanted to get to the opera. He did get there, and lo and behold, who should walk in and sit in the next seat to him was a German general, who fortunately had a good-looking
Colonel.
girlfriend.
Yeah.
Oh, Colonel.
Yeah.
And so he says luck plays a part in the life of most people. But the thing that really makes the difference is hard work. And I'm
Yep.
now voicing his philosophy. When people ask him, what do you attribute your success? He says hard work
And luck.
and luck. And good luck.
And what you do with
Yes.
luck, right?
Yeah.
That too. That too.
This has been amazing. You're an amazing guy. Does it ever, I mean, with all due respect, after you read the book, did you say, wow, who is this guy they're talking about?
Well, you know, I read his last draft of the book, and that's the only reading that I've done of the book.
Mhm.
And I thought it was quite good, with some exceptions. But nevertheless, that was it.
Well, it's been just such a great revelation to all of us here in Jamestown. I said it the other night, and I'll say it to you again, that what an honor it is to have you back among us here for a short period of time and to really reflect on all that you've accomplished. And
Well, it's pretty difficult and impossible, really, for me to encompass everything that has transpired this past week.
You know, that program that was put together by the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association, it not only contains a listing of the events that when they gave him the first Anthony A. Alaimo Award for Judicial Excellence, but it contains a speech that he has given to new citizens that he has granted in his courtroom. But he has expressed there his philosophy, and in that speech, he really tells it all about what he believes about America, what he believes about patriotism, and what he believes about the responsibility of all of us in America to get involved in their government, get involved in following the principles of the Constitution.
you continue to do that. You continue to do that. You continue to do ceremonies.
Yes,
And-
yes. We do them about 3 times a year.
And I suspect that's really a magic moment.
Oh, it is. It is for me. Many judges do not do it. They let their magistrates handle it, or clerks. But I've always felt that it was really not only an obligation, but really a welcome experience on my part, because it did rejuvenate my feelings about being part of this country.
Well, you've served the country extremely well, and it's just so heartening to see all that you've given back to it. And
Well, thank you very much for that description.
Greg, I mentioned luck before, as the judge has, and you may have mentioned this the other night, but He was brought over by his family at age 2 from Sicily. Had the family waited 3 years to come over, they never would have made it. The reason is that 2 years after the Alaimo family came to America, the United States government shut off the immigration from Italy and the Mediterranean area, and that was shut off for probably 8 years. So luck played a part in the Alaimo family too, that had they not come at that time, we wouldn't have been here at all.
In case you haven't gotten it, he's a pretty proud nephew.
Amen.
You know.
Well, I'm proud of him.
Yeah, it's and the family. I must tell you, just from an outsider looking in, to see that familial relationship that the Alaimo Gerasi family all has, and how they really they're so close. It's a real tribute to the entire family, and back to your mom and dad, and how that is all sort of the seeds from that relationship have spread throughout the country, but we've really been blessed here in Chautauqua County specifically.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. This has been terrific. I know he's got you working again. The guy's ruthless.
Book signing in half hour.
Oh, God.
Greg, thanks for